I took a deep breath and reminded myself to stay calm as I inched forward in the airport security line. The bright fluorescent lights and the echo of distant announcements made the busy terminal feel cold and impersonal. At 72 years old, I moved a bit slower than the impatient travelers behind me. My hands trembled slightly as I placed my cane and modest leather purse on the conveyor belt and shuffled through the metal detector. Suddenly, the scanner's alarm shrieked. My heart skipped a beat. A young TSA officer with a crew cut stepped forward, expression stern. "Ma'am, step aside, arms out," he ordered brusquely. Heat crept up my cheeks as I complied, lifting my frail arms out to the sides. People in line began to stare. I caught a few curious glances and heard a couple of whispers. My face burned with embarrassment. The officer waved a handheld detector around my body. It squealed sharply when it passed my left hip. I knew the culprit, a metal hip replacement from a surgery years ago. I mustered a polite smile and tried to explain. "I have a hip implant, dear. That's probably—" "Keep quiet, ma'am," he snapped, cutting me off before I could finish. "I'll ask the questions." His curt tone echoed in my ears. I bit my tongue and nodded, humiliation already pricking at my eyes. A female agent was called over, and without a shred of privacy, she began a firm pat-down in front of everyone. My arms quivered as I held them out. The agent's latex-gloved hands swept over my cardigan, down the sides of my blouse, and along the waistband of my slacks. I winced as strangers looked on. A knot of shame tightened in my stomach. Nearby, I heard a teenager at the spectacle, and one of the TSA officers let out a derisive as he rummaged through the contents of my purse that had come out of the X-ray bin. "Traveling alone at your age, huh?" the male officer remarked, shaking his head, as he rifled through my neatly folded handkerchiefs and the paperback novel I'd brought for the plane. His voice had a mocking edge. I felt a lump forming in my throat, but I swallowing it down. This wasn't the first time I'd endured indignity, I told myself, though it had been many years since I felt this powerless. He continued digging and pulled out my wallet. It was old and worn, the brown leather soft from decades of use. From it, he extracted my driver's license and then a second card, one I always kept tucked away, hidden behind the others. "What's this?" he muttered. The officer's brow furrowed as he examined the laminated card, which bore a much younger photo of me and a name that no one in the crowd would recognize. It wasn't my current legal name, but an alias I hadn't heard spoken aloud in a very long time. He held it up, squinting at the unfamiliar credentials.
"Are you carrying fake IDs?"
he barked, suspicion mounting in his tone. I opened my mouth, grappling for an explanation that wouldn't breach the confidentiality I had sworn to uphold. "It's not fake," I said softly, my eyes lowering. It was a work identification from a long time ago.
The officer let out a short, incredulous laugh.
"A work ID with a different name? You expect me to buy that?" he scoffed. By now, a supervisor, a heavy-set man in a crisp white shirt, had approached, drawn by the commotion. He took the mysterious ID card from the officer's hand and examined it closely. I could see the faint lettering glint under the fluorescent lights. United States Department of Defense, my photograph, a clearance level stamp, and the alias I'd used during classified operations. "This is government issue. Looks real." "Why's the name different?" the supervisor demanded, narrowing his eyes at me. The surrounding passengers, sensing high drama, gawked openly. I felt utterly exposed, like a specimen under a microscope. My lips parted, but no sound came out. What could I say? That I used to be someone else? That I had served in ways they couldn't imagine? Any such claim would sound either insane or boastful, and I could see in their faces that they assumed I was just an old woman, spinning tales to escape trouble. I can explain, I stammered at last, voice barely audible. Before I could gather my thoughts, the supervisor snapped to his team. Escort her to secondary screening, now! A firm hand grasped my elbow. The young agent hastily shoved my scattered belongings back into my purse. In a daze, I was guided out of the line and toward a side door. My eyes darted around at the crowd of strangers staring at the troublemaker being led away. I caught one woman's pitying look and a man in a business suit shaking his head, as if I were some criminal. My dignity lay in tatters. As I passed through the doorway, tears of frustration welled in my eyes. But I blinked them back. I would not cry. I would not give them the satisfaction. The door closed behind me with a heavy thud, enclosing me in a windowless gray screening room. The walls were bare except for a poster of passenger rights and a wall clock ticking away the seconds of my ordeal. The supervisor and a female officer stood between me and the exit. The younger man who had searched my bag was there too, arms crossed as he leaned against the wall, eyeing me like I was some kind of criminal. Have a seat, the supervisor said, not unkindly but firmly, gesturing to a metal chair in the center of the room. I sat gingerly, my back straight and purse clutched tightly on my lap. My heart was pounding. I could feel it thudding in my chest and echoing in my ears. The air felt cold against my skin, or maybe it was just the chill of being treated like a culprit that made me shiver. The supervisor held up the DoD identification card. Let's start with this. Explain why you have an ID with this name and photo. Are you impersonating someone from the Department of Defense? His tone suggested he was giving me one chance to come clean. The female guard's eyes bore into me as well, though I noticed a flicker of curiosity there. I took a shaky breath. I'm not impersonating anyone, sir, I said, mustering as much dignity as I could. That identification was issued to me many years ago. I paused, searching their faces. There was no recognition, only skepticism. The name on that card was a cover identity, I continued carefully. I worked for the government under that name during the late 1980s. The younger officer scoffed, pushing off the wall. Cover identity? What, like you were a spy or something? He clearly found the notion absurd. He glanced at his supervisor, lips curled in a skeptical smirk. I lowered my gaze to my lap. The truth hung on the tip of my tongue. In that moment, I felt the decades of secrecy weighing on me. Memories flashed unbidden, crawling through a muddy field under cover of darkness, transmitting a coded message from a safe house in East Berlin, the thunderous roar of a helicopter extraction under gunfire. My hands unconsciously tightened around my purse as those images flickered by. Something like that, I finally whispered, almost to myself. The supervisor's frown deepened. He seemed unsure whether I was delusional or telling the truth. He cleared his throat. Ma'am, let's be clear. Are you saying you worked for the Department of Defense under an alias? In what capacity? His voice had softened a bit, as if he suspected there was a real story here. I lifted my eyes to meet his. A classified capacity, I replied. I'm not at liberty to discuss details in full. Perhaps there's a number you can call? Someone who can verify what I'm saying. My voice trembled, not out of fear, but from the strain of this moment. I never imagined I'd have to lay even a sliver of my secret life bare like this. The female officer stepped forward then. She'd been silent up to now. I noticed her gaze drop to my left forearm, where the edge of my sleeve had ridden up slightly. A small, faded tattoo peeked out, an emblem of outstretched wings and a sword, the insignia of a once classified Air Force Special Operations unit. Her eyes widened, almost imperceptibly. Ma'am, that tattoo, she said, recognizing a hint of recognition in her voice. My father served in the Air Force. I've seen that symbol before. Only a few units have it. Where did you? I flushed and quickly tugged my sleeve down. That tattoo had been inked on me in a secret ceremony after a mission in 1984. I earned it in service, I answered softly. The younger officer's smug expression faltered as he looked between the female guard and me. The supervisor's stern demeanor began to thaw, replaced with a cautious curiosity. The pieces were there, the DoD ID, the mention of a cover name, a military tattoo, but they still struggled to fit them together. The supervisor stepped out of the room with my ID card in hand. "Wait here," he instructed. Through the cracked door, I could hear him on the phone, his voice, low voice, but urgent. "I need to verify a credential. Yes, I'll hold." Higher clearance, apparently. The rest was muffled. Inside the room, an awkward silence settled. The female officer offered me a small paper cup of water with a gentler demeanor now. She handed it to me, her eyes kind. "Here, ma'am," she said. "You okay?" I accepted the cup with a grateful nod, my fingers trembling as I took a sip. The cold water steadied me a bit. "Thank you," I whispered. Meanwhile, the young officer shifted his weight from foot to foot by the door. He was avoiding my gaze, the cockiness from earlier entirely gone. A flush had crept up his neck. He spoke softly, without meeting my eyes. "Ma'am, I didn't mean to," he began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. The remorse on his face said enough. He was realizing who I might be and regretting how he'd treated me. I managed a faint smile. "I appreciate that," I replied. Though I left the sentence unfinished, my tone conveyed forgiveness. It wasn't truly all right until everything was sorted, but seeing his sincere regret eased some of the sting.
Several tense minutes ticked by. I sat in that sterile room listening to the muffled cadence of the supervisor's voice on the phone outside. My mind wandered to distant years and faraway places. In the silence, I remembered the last time I had been under harsh scrutiny like this. Not by my own countrymen, but by enemies, who showed far less mercy. The irony wasn't lost on me. After a lifetime of protecting my country from threats, here I was, considered a threat by a few uninformed officers. I closed my eyes and steadied my breathing. The door swung open, and the supervisor stepped back in, his face noticeably changed. Gone was the skeptical scowl. His expression was now a mixture of astonishment, respect, and a touch of disbelief. He held my old ID card gingerly between his fingers, as if it were something precious or dangerous. He walked straight up to me and, with trembling hands, extended the card back. "Ma'am, we've received confirmation of your status." His eyes flicked to the female officer and the younger man, then back to me. He swallowed hard. I want to apologize for how you were treated. We truly did not know." Slowly, I took the card and slipped it back into my wallet. My heart thudded against my ribcage as I realized what he meant. They knew something now, enough to transform their treatment of me. Perhaps he had spoken to someone high up, someone who uttered a code word or reference that cast everything in a new light. However it happened, the dynamic in the room had shifted entirely. The supervisor straightened his posture, then, to my utter astonishment, lifted his right hand in a crisp salute. "Thank you for your service, ma'am." I stared at him in disbelief, my breath catching in my throat. No one had saluted me in decades, certainly not with such genuine deference. A wave of emotion crashed over me. I managed to return a shaky salute, my hand quivering as I raised it to my brow. The motion felt both alien and deeply familiar. The young TSA officer snapped to attention as well. His face was flushed red and he looked equal parts embarrassed and awestruck. He raised his hand in a salute toward me, mimicking his supervisor, though he could barely meet my eyes. The female officer stood up straight and gave me a firm nod, her hand placed over her heart rather than a formal salute, perhaps out of a mix of respect and uncertainty about protocol. Before I could find my voice to respond, the door to the screening room burst open yet again. This time, a man in a decorated army dress uniform filled the doorway, flanked by 2 Air Force officers. The room, already silent, seemed to grow even quieter. My eyes widened as I recognized the insignia on his shoulder, a silver star, a brigadier general. Stepping forward with commanding presence, the general removed his cap, tucking it under his arm. It took me only a second to place his face, though I hadn't seen it in over 30 years. "Surprise General Marcus Hall," I breathed, hardly believing it. He had been a young captain I'd worked with briefly in 1988 during a joint operation in the Middle East. He must have risen through the ranks all these years. General Hall's stern expression softened the moment he saw me. "Emotional Captain Margaret Larson," he addressed me, using my real name and former rank, with a respectful nod. "Sincerely, it's an honor to see you again." Without hesitation, he brought his heels together and snapped a salute, his back ramrod straight. I was momentarily overwhelmed, hearing my name and rank spoken aloud. Things that had been buried in secret files for so long unloosed a flood of feelings. My vision blurred as tears gathered. Somehow I managed to stand. The female officer quickly took the cup from my hand so I wouldn't spill it, and returned the general's salute, steadier this time. He stepped forward and offered his hand. I grasped it, and he covered my knuckles gently with his other hand, comforting. "We never forgot you, Margaret," he said softly for me alone to hear. Reassuring. "I'm sorry you had to go through this, but we're going to make it right." General Hall then turned to the stunned TSA officers who stood frozen, unsure whether they should stay at attention or not. Firmly, "Thank you, gentlemen. I'll take it from here," he said to the supervisor, who nodded swiftly and stepped back. The general's gaze swept over the small assemblage. "I realize you all were just doing your jobs," he said in a measured tone. "But I think it's only fair you know just who you've had in your custody." He placed a hand lightly on my shoulder as if presenting me. "This lady is one of our nation's unsung heroes." I felt myself blush, and I opened my mouth to protest, to insist I was no hero, that I only did my duty. But General Hall gently continued, not letting me diminish myself. "During the Cold War, Captain Larson undertook missions of great importance and great peril. She saved lives, prevented disasters, and did so without any expectation of glory. Her identity was classified, and her deeds went unrecognized in the public eye." He paused, his voice steady but full of pride. "She bears scars and memories that many of us in uniform can barely imagine. We're here today because her record, though hidden, commands the utmost respect." The room was absolutely still except for the quiet, astonished breathing of the TSA personnel. The young officer's eyes were as round as coins. The supervisor looked profoundly humbled, as if wishing he could sink through the floor for having manhandled me. The female officer smiled through tears that had gathered in her eyes. General Hall looked at each of them. "I trust that Captain Larson is free to go about her business now?" he asked, though it was less a question and more a polite formality. "Yes, sir, absolutely," the supervisor stammered. "And once again, ma'am, I offer my deepest apologies." I gave him a small, warm smile. "Thank you, I appreciate it," I replied softly. In truth, in that moment, I found I did forgive them. They couldn't have known, and their astonishment and remorse now felt genuine. The general nodded in satisfaction. Then, unexpectedly, he reached into the inner pocket of his dress uniform. "Captain Larson," he said formally, "there's one more thing." He pulled out a navy blue velvet box embossed with an official seal. My heart began to thud as I recognized it. With a deliberate gesture, General Hall opened the box. Inside, gleaming softly, was a medal, one of the highest honors in the nation. It was the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the very same award I had been informed I would receive decades ago, in a private memo, though the ceremony never occurred publicly due to secrecy. Gasps! I gasped quietly. The TSA officers looked at the medal, then at me. comprehension dawning that someone like me could merit such an honor. The supervisor's mouth hung slightly open.
By order of the President of the United States, General Hall announced, his voice thick with emotion now, I am here to finally present you with the Presidential Medal of Freedom in recognition of your extraordinary contributions and sacrifices. Tears overflowed freely down my cheeks. I couldn't speak. I just nodded in acceptance. The general carefully lifted the medal from its cushioned box and pinned it to my chest, right over my heart, onto my simple floral blouse. His fingers were gentle, and I noticed they trembled just a bit. He was fighting back tears, too. Once it was secure, he stepped back and saluted me one more time, as did the two officers behind him. The TSA staff, moved by the magnitude of the moment, mirrored the salute yet again. So there I stood, an old woman in an airport security room, returning the salutes of a general, two officers, and a handful of airport guards, with a presidential medal gleaming on my chest. It was almost surreal. I wiped at my eyes, smiling as I did so. "Thank you," I managed to whisper to General Hall. My voice trembled. Those two simple words carried decades of gratitude for the recognition, for the understanding, for not being forgotten. He gave a little bow of his head. "No, thank you, Captain," he replied. General Hall offered me his arm, and I took it gratefully. Together, we exited the screening room. The moment we stepped into the public area of the terminal, a ripple of attention spread. Word of what had happened must have traveled beyond the confines of that small room. Perhaps airport staff had shared the news. Or perhaps it was the striking image of a uniformed general escorting an elderly civilian woman that caught people's eyes. Travelers paused mid-step. There was an odd, expectant hush, and then I heard a smattering of applause. It started with just a couple of people, a gate attendant and a man in a pilot's uniform standing nearby. Then it spread in waves through the crowd clustered beyond the security ropes. More people joined in, clapping respectfully, a few cheers even rising above the clamor of the airport. I even spotted the woman who had given me that pitying look earlier. Now she was smiling broadly and clapping with her hands high above her head. My cheeks flushed with a mix of joy and embarrassment. I had never been one for the spotlight. To have all these strangers clapping for me was indescribably moving and slightly overwhelming. General Hall patted my hand reassuringly as he guided me forward. The TSA supervisor and the other officers trailed behind us by a few steps, looking both proud and sheepish at the same time. As we passed under the arch of the security checkpoint, I noticed the young TSA officer, the one who had initially humiliated me, standing off to the side. He had removed his cap and held it against his chest. His eyes were red, as if he'd been crying or close to it. When our eyes met, he gave me a quavering smile and bowed his head deeply in a gesture of respect. I returned a gentle nod of understanding and forgiveness. In that silent exchange, I hoped he felt absolved. I bore him no ill will now. We halted briefly near the podium where boarding passes are checked. General Hall turned to me, his face glowing with pride.
"Margaret, is there someone meeting you at your destination? Can we assist you further?"
He asked. I shook my head, finding my voice at last.
"I'll be fine.
"I'm just heading to Arlington to visit my husband's grave and a few old friends," I said quietly. It was the truth. My late husband, also a veteran, was buried at Arlington National Cemetery, and I was going to attend a small Memorial Day gathering with some fellow widows and retired service members. The general's eyes softened.
"Very well."
He replied. He then raised his voice slightly to address those around us.
"Folks, if you could excuse us, Captain Larson has a flight to catch."
Immediately, a gate agent rushed forward.
"Ma'am, we will delay the flight if needed. Please take your time."
I chuckled through my tears and shook my head. "That's not necessary, dear." I've had enough fuss for one day.
A few people in the crowd laughed kindly at that.
With every step I took, a few strangers reached out to shake my hand or simply touch my shoulder and say thank you for your service, or bless you. One older gentleman, himself wearing a VFW cap covered in pins, saluted me with tears in his eyes. I realized that in sharing this moment, others who had served or sacrificed felt seen too. At the gate before I boarded, General Hall took both my hands in his. "We will make sure a wheelchair is waiting for you when you land if you want it. And if it's all right with you, I'd like to attend that gathering at Arlington. I have a feeling some old friends of yours would like to see this." He gestured gently at the medal on my chest. I smiled, a new wave of tears threatening. "Of course, General. It would be my honor," I replied. In truth, I knew exactly who he meant. A few of my former comrades were likely the old friends, and they would be stunned and overjoyed to see this recognition finally come. With a final salute and a warm handshake from each of the officers, I was escorted onto the plane ahead of all other passengers. As I settled into my seat, emotionally drained and exhilarated all at once, I took a moment to absorb everything. The plane began taxiing shortly after, and I gazed out the window at the terminal. It struck me that, in the course of one afternoon, I had lived a lifetime of emotions: shame, fear, nostalgia, vindication, and pride. An airline stewardess approached quietly and handed me a tissue from my tears and a glass of water. She leaned in and whispered, "My grandfather was in the service too. Thank you." I patted her hand and gave her a watery smile. As the engines roared and the plane lifted off, I closed my eyes and let out a long, shuddering breath. Relief, contentment, and peace washed over me. I thought of my younger self, the brave girl who had once slipped behind enemy lines with false papers and steely nerves. She was with me today, inside this frail body, and for the first time she had been acknowledged in the open. I thought of my husband, who had known bits and pieces of my work and supported me quietly, and of how proud he would be right now. I thought of those colleagues who never got their moment of acknowledgement, and I silently dedicated this honor to them. Looking at the medal pinned on my chest, catching the sunlight streaming through the window, I allowed myself to feel truly proud. For so many years, I had downplayed my own story, content to fade into the background. But now, it felt as if the world had suddenly said, "We see you, we are grateful." Tears of joy slipped down my cheeks, but I didn't wipe them away immediately. They were honest tears, hard-earned and well-deserved. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, I had composed myself. I sat back, staring at the vast blue sky outside. In the clouds, I almost fancied I saw shapes of saluting figures, my memory playing kind tricks. I smiled, resting my head against the seat. My journey, both literal and metaphorical, was nearing its destination. In my heart, I felt lighter than air. I never sought to be seen as a hero, but fate had a way of unveiling truths in the end. And as I drifted into a light sleep, the medal rising and falling with my gentle breaths, I carry with me a profound sense of fulfillment. At long last, justice and honor had found its way to me, the old woman so easily dismissed, but who turned out to be so much more.